Lights, right?
I know it is. Hare Krishna. Sorry. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Rajajanaranjana Yashodanandana Rajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Brahmahamsa Parivajacharya Stovatara Sutta Sri Srimad Bhagavatam Tulsi Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Antakoti Vaishnavrinda Ki All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Reading from the 5th canto, chapter 18, text 33. Title of the chapter is The Residents of Jamadweep Offer Prayers. This is the final verse of Aryama's prayers to Kormadev. So, we'll read the Sanskrit. Yasmin Sankheya Visheshanama Rupakrito Kavibi Kalpiteyam Sangyayayap Tattva Drishapaniyate Tasmai Namah Sankhya Nidarshanaya Deity. Yasmin Sankheya Visheshanama Rupakrito Kavibikalpiteyam Sankhya Tattva Manama Sankhya Sankhya Visheshanama Rupakrito Kavibikalpiteyam Tasmai Namah Sankhya Nidarshanaya. Yasmin Sankheya Visheshanama Kalpiteyam Niyate Namah Sankhya Nidarshanaya. Yasmin Sankheya Visheshanama Rupakrito Kavibikalpiteyam Sankhya Tattva Drishapaniyate Tasmai Namah Sankhya Nidarshanaya. Please. Yasmin Sankheya Visheshanama Rupakrito Kavibikalpiteyam Tattva Drishapaniyate Tasmai Namah Sankhya Nidarshanaya. Yasmin Sankheya Visheshanama Rupakrito Kavibikalpiteyam Sankhya Tattva Drishapaniyate Tasmai Namah Sankhya Nidarshanaya. Yasmin, in you, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Asankhya, innumerable, Vishesha, particularly, Nama, names, Rupa, forms, Akrito, possessing bodily features. Kavibihi, by great learned persons. Kalpita, imagined. Iyam, this. Sankhya, number. Yaya, by whom? Tattva, of the truth. Drisha, by knowledge. Apaniyate, is extracted. Tasmai, unto him. Namaha, respectful obeisances. Sankhya Nidarshanaya, who is the revealer of this numerical knowledge. Te, unto you. Iti, thus. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Translation and purport. Translation, O my Lord, your name, form, and bodily features are expanded in countless forms. No one can determine exactly how many forms exist, yet you yourself, in your incarnation as the learned scholar Kapila Dev, have analyzed the cosmic manifestation as containing 24 elements. Therefore, if one is interested in Sankhya philosophy, by which one can enumerate the different truths, he must hear it from you. Unfortunately, non-devotees simply count the different elements and remain ignorant of your actual form. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Purport. Philosophers and scientists have been trying to study the entire cosmic situation and have been theorizing and calculating in different ways for millions and millions of years. However, the speculative research work of a so-called scientist or philosopher is always interrupted when he dies, and the laws of nature go on without regard for his work. For billions of years, changes take place in the material creation, until at last the whole universe is dissolved and remains in an unmanifested state. Constant change and destruction, bhutva praliyate, is perpetually going on in nature. Yet the material scientists want to study natural laws without knowing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the background of nature. As Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita 9:10, Maya Jakshina Prakriti Suyate Sacharacharam Etunanena Konteya Jagad Viparvartate. This material nature is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, and it is producing all moving and unmoving beings. By its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. End quote. Now the material creation is manifest. Eventually it will be annihilated and remain for many millions of years in a dormant state, and finally will again be created. This is the law of nature. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today's verse is about, yesterday we heard about how the Lord's is expanded everywhere by his energies. His energies are are basically everything that we see. The living entities, the hills, the rivers, the trees, everything that we see, it's all the energy of God. So in this verse today, we're continuing that same theme, how the Lord is expanded in countless forms. His form, His name is expanded in unlimited forms. And we hear Arima glorifying Kormadev as having unlimited forms, and he actually talks about Lord Kapila who came and gave us an idea of how we can understand the different forms of God in the material nature. So I thought I would just go over a little bit about what Kapila says on the Sankhya philosophy, and then talk a little bit about the Lord's actual form. So, Sankhya philosophy, in the verse we heard how there's 24 elements in material nature. Sankhya philosophy means counting or enumeration. Sankhya means counting or enumeration. So it's like the analytical study of material nature. And the reason it's important is because it tells us our relationship between God, the soul, and material nature. So we start, everything is contained within what's called pradhan. Pradhan is the unmanifested state of material nature. In the spiritual sky, there's this little cloud off to the side, which is like considered material nature, and in its unmanifested state, it's called pradhan. Everything is there. Everything that we see, all the subtle and gross elements are there in pradhan. So, an example, so we can help understand it. It's kind of like a chalkboard, or it's like a kind of a lump of clay. It's unmanifested. There's nothing really there. But when Krishna glances at this pradhan, or Mahavishnu glances at the pradhan, it's like drawing on the chalkboard or making shapes out of the clay. So then the pradhan gets kind of animated. When Mahavishnu glances at the pradhan, in his glance he injects within the pradhan the jiva souls and the time element. So therefore pradhan starts to move and shapes start to come, and material nature starts to become manifested. And when the material nature starts to become manifested, it's called prakriti, or mahat tattva. And then the very first element that comes out of the mahat tattva is ahankar, false ego. It's the most, false ego, it's the most subtle element it's the first element that appears, and it's the most subtle. And then from ahankar, the three modes of material nature manifest. Sattva gun, rajagun, tamagun, mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. So then from sattva gun, the mind is produced, which is another subtle element. And then from rajagun, intelligence comes. And then also the 5 knowledge-acquiring senses and the 5 working senses. So the knowledge-acquiring senses are just our sense of hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, seeing. And then the working senses are speaking, working, traveling, evacuating, generating. So these all come from the Rajagun. And then from Tamagun we get our gross and subtle elements. So we have earth, ether, air, water, fire, earth. And then they have a corresponding subtle element, sound, touch, form, color, taste, and smell. So we hear in the purport how there's many philosophers have been trying to come up with different theories about material nature for a very long time. One of the ideas that modern science came up with is this idea of conservation of energy. That energy cannot be created or destroyed, that it can only change forms. So this is similar to the Vedic idea, because in the Vedic idea, in the Pradhan, it's eternal. It doesn't. You can't like add to it or take away from it, but it's eternal. It just changed forms. It becomes manifest and then it becomes unmanifest. So like that, the conservation of energy rule is valid, but it's not really valid at the level in which the scientists study it. And the reason is because the scientists, their definition of energy is always is changing. And they're always discovering new forms of energy that they're needing to include in their conservation of energy equations. So a good example of this is the discovery of the neutrino. So back in the 1930s, they discovered this one reaction, which is when an atom decays, it gives off an electron. And then they found out that when this reaction happens, conservation of energy doesn't apply. Like the reaction loses more energy than that's put into it. So the scientists were shocked by this because they thought, the conservation of energy was like the law of nature, and it can't be. This was like an experiment which proved it wrong. Apparently so. So they were shocked. So then scientists were, thinking about this reaction, and then there's this one scientist, Enrique Fermi, who proposed that, well, maybe there's another particle involved in this reaction, and he posited the neutrino, which acts as the thing that carries away the electron from the reaction. And if you posit a neutrino, then okay, then the reaction, the conservation of energy principle is still valid, because now you have this new form of energy, the neutrino, that can be put into the equation. So then, over time, they did more experiments, and they found out, the neutrino, yeah, that actually exists according to their experiments. So then now, their conservation of energy equation now includes the neutrino in their big long equation of different types of energy, kinetic energy, and whatever, potential energy, and all the different kinds of energy that there are. Now they added this another element of energy into the equation. Of course, what their equations are not including, though, are the more subtle energies, as discussed in the Vedic, in the Sankhya philosophy, such as the mind energy. This is where the scientist doesn't really say anything about the mind energy, because if we say that there's like a mind that can influence the brain to do something like lift the hand, for example, then that would violate the law of conservation of energy. Because where did that energy come from to influence the mind to move your arm? It's not accounted for in their equation. So anyway, and then what to speak of subtler elements like intelligence, false ego. So there's a kind of like a incompleteness. So in order to really understand the law of conservation of energy, you'd really have to go to the level of Pradhan and include all the different energies involved to make that conservation of energy equation actually work. And even then, ultimately you'd still have to go back to Krishna, because Krishna is a reservoir of all energies. He can easily just manifest a whole planet. And then if you think about like like Einstein's equation equals mc squared, that's a lot of energy. Like the mass of the planet times the speed of light squared or something. So there's a tremendous amount of energy that can just be poofed out of nowhere from Krishna. So that would kind of throw off the whole conservation of energy altogether. So then one might say, if natural question might come up, if matter is not conscious, then how is it that consciousness is linked up with matter? This is a classic question. Because we are conscious, everyone will agree that we're conscious. And it appears that matter displays symptoms of consciousness. So, like bodies moving. So it appears that matter is also conscious in certain ways, like bodies and things moving. Things are conscious. So this led many scientists to conclude that, well, maybe matter is conscious. And they usually attribute consciousness to the brain, because the brain is where things get very, very complex in science. Things they can't fully understand the brain fully, and they can't understand consciousness for sure. There's definitely no consensus in the scientific community about what the heck consciousness is. And even just understanding the brain, it's so complex. So they kind of think that consciousness is there in the brain. Like some time ago, they thought that in the whole cerebral cortex there was 10 billion neurons. And then I guess not recently they discovered that just in one small section of the cerebrum there's 100 billion neurons. 10 billion was way off. So just in one small section had 100 billion neurons. And to try to keep track of what 100 billion neurons are doing, it's practically impossible. We have supercomputers now that are trying to come up with models of the brain and everything, but even then it's so complex that it's bewildering scientists. In fact, there's this, but they're still confident. They really do still think that they can explain consciousness. There was this one article in Scientific American which said that they boldly said that we will be able to explain consciousness very soon. And first we will start by explaining visual perception. And then we'll be able to explain other facets or features of consciousness. So we'll see. We're still waiting to see if they can explain consciousness in terms of the brain. But the Sankhya philosophy is understanding of how consciousness relates with matter is that we have our gross elements of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And each of these gross elements are connected with subtle elements of sound, touch, form, flavor, and odor. And these gross and subtle elements are linked up with the senses. And then the senses are linked up with the mind. Now, the actual link is not, the mechanism of how exactly it's linked, we don't know. It's not said, like the actual mechanism for the link. But it could be understood something kind of like a mouse being connected to a computer or something. So there's like a communication link in which if the mouse moves in a certain way, the computer picks up that there's something going on. So like that, the mind picks up on what the senses are, the information that the senses are gathering. So then the mind is connected with the intelligence and the false ego, and then the false ego is connected to the soul by Krishna. And the link there from false ego to the soul is Krishna. And this is why the Sankhya philosophy ultimately has to be theistic. Because if there's this one, I guess, imposter we hear about reading, every time we read about Lord Kapila's philosophy, it always comes up that there's Kapila, who's the son of Devahuti, who's the incarnation of God, and then there's this other Kapila who's like an imposter, who came up with his own idea of what Sankhya was and propounded that. So, and apparently I hear, I don't know anybody who studies Sankhya philosophy, but I hear in India that the atheistic version of Sankhya philosophy is actually most prominent. Not too many. So when people hear of Sankhya philosophy, they usually think of the atheistic version. And the atheistic version just cuts Krishna out of the picture altogether. It doesn't include any kind of supreme being in their analysis. In the verse we were just reading, that all they do is just go on counting the material elements, and they completely remain ignorant of the Lord's actual form. So I guess the atheistic idea of the Sankhya philosophy is kind of like a plum pudding, like a plum pudding model, or like a plum cake or something. So this model is that the Sankhya philosophy, the atheistic Sankhya philosophy, still accepts the idea that there is a spirit soul. There are conscious entities. But it doesn't accept an idea of God or creator or anything like that. It just says that pradhan is there, and it's always existing, and that the living entity or the conscious beings are injected into the pradhan, kind of like plums in a plum cake or something. And then it's just the living entities are undergoing different experiences according to how the modes of nature are transforming. And that's basically what the atheistic philosophy, Sankhya philosophy, says. And then modern science is even worse. They just get rid of the whole idea of spirit soul altogether also. So they get rid of Krishna, and they get rid of the idea of spirit soul. So all there is material nature, which is endlessly transforming in different shapes and sizes and things. And sometimes material nature produces brains, which make statements about consciousness, which doesn't actually exist. And other times it produces, large masses of gas and other things. But that's basically all it is. It's nothing more than that. So in order for the Sankhya philosophy to actually work, Krishna is an essential component, because Krishna is the source of matter, Krishna is the source of the spirit souls, and Krishna is the link between the two. So without that, it doesn't work. The atheistic Sankhya philosophy has a very difficult time explaining that link between the false ego and the Atma, the spirit soul. So that's basically where, this is mostly what Sankhya philosophy talks about, just counting the different elements and understanding the relationship between the different elements, the soul, and then the theistic version also talks about the Supreme Lord. So we hear that there are unlimited, countless forms of the Lord, and there's a description that says, just as hundreds and thousands of small rivulets are flowing from like a large body of water, so similarly there are unlimited incarnations flowing from Supreme Lord Sri Hari. We hear how the Lord's energies are everywhere, the trees, the mountains, the living entities, but also the Supreme Lord's name and form and qualities and pastimes and everything, they're also unlimited. So we commonly see the picture here of the Das avatars, the 10 primary, incarnations of God. Also up there. This list was mentioned in Garuda Puranas being kind of like 10 prominent incarnations, and then this is also glorified by the poet Jayadev Goswami in his song. We sing part of it every day. But there's more than just these 10, obviously. There's another 25 mentioned in the Srimad Bhagvatam, and they're all Leela avatars. These 10 are all Leela avatars, and then there's 25 mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam. There's different ways we can kind of categorize and understand the different forms of the Lord. There's 8,400,000 species, and of these species, there's 6 main categories. There's the water species, the non-moving species like trees and plants and things. Insect, reptile species, birds, quadrupeds, animals, and human species. So of the 900,000 water species, we see a form of the Lord appearing as Matsya avatar. So we're just reading about Matsya avatar in these prayers by the residents of Jambudvip. And then in the non-moving species, the Lord appears as the Daru Brahman tree. So the Daru Brahman tree, it's a special neem tree that is used to carve the Jagannath deities in Jagannath Puri. Jagannath Puri, every year the Jagannath deities, they get replaced. So new Jagannath deities are carved from very specific trees, which are considered to be, the Lord. And locating this tree is very interesting how they do it in Jagannath Puri. first of all, the tree has to, it's not just any old neem tree that they'll cut down and use to make deities of the Lord. There has to be a tree that has 4 main branches to signify Vishnu, Vishnu's presence. It has to be located near a body of water. It has to be surrounded by 3 mountains. There has to be an anthill nearby. There has to be a cobra pit at the bottom of the tree. There can't be any broken or cut branches. There can't be any birds nesting on the tree. It has to be dark, kind of like a darker tree, because Jagannath is darker. And there has to be other like lighter variations of different trees nearby for Baladev and Subhadra. So, and not only if that's hard enough to find, that's pretty hard to find a tree that fits all those descriptions. But even more amazing is that there has to be natural impressions of the conch shell and chakra wheel at the trunk of the tree. So that's kind of what you see here. This is a picture of one of the Daru Brahman trees that they used. So locating this tree it really requires divine intervention, because how are you going to find this tree just by walking around? It's not going to be easy. So what the priests do at Jagannath Puri, there's I think they do some kind of special worship or something of some goddess or something who appears in the priest's dreams and tells him where actually this tree is for the next new set of deities. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. So the Lord appears even as trees. He appears as insects and reptiles. In fact, the other day we were just having a little discussion in our evening program about how stones can be living. And we were talking about how there's this one special insect or worm called the Vajrakita worm that it's by many scientists, this worm is believed to have been extinct like 5,000 years ago. But from scriptures, we see that this worm was used, it carved a lot of the markings that you see on the Shalagram Shilas. So this is a special worm that was inspired by Vishnu to carve all these markings on the Shalagram Shilas, which signify different forms of the Lord. So there's the Matsya Shalagram, Gopal Shalagram, and all these different kinds of the Shalagram, which were carved by these worms, the Vajrakita worms. And some say that these worms are actually Vishnu coming. Vishnu appeared as one of these worms. So I don't know exactly where that's found, but in the story of Tulsi Devi, you can read about the Vajrakita worm. So then also we hear about Lord appearing as Ananta Shesh, and then also Korma, the tortoise, which is the form of the Lord being prayed to here in this verse. Then there's 1 million bird species, and the Lord also appears as a bird. He appears as the Hansa avatar, or the swan avatar. This is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagvatam. So one time the Lord Brahma had 4 mental sons, the 4 Kumaras, and the 4 Kumaras were asking Brahma, I guess, a tough question, and he wasn't able to answer it. They asked him, so the sense objects, they naturally enter they enter into the mind, and the mind has a natural proclivity towards 4 sense objects. So for one trying to get liberated, for one who's striving for liberation, how is someone supposed to overcome sense gratification when it seems like, I don't know how it's possible. How is that possible to overcome sense gratification? That was the question. And Lord Brahma couldn't answer it right away. He was bewildered. He didn't know. And this was really interesting because Lord Brahma, earlier in the 2nd canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, he said that because I've caught hold of the lotus feet of the Lord, I'm never bewildered in cosmic decision making. My senses never become degraded by temporary attachments. And whatever I say has never proven to be false. These are things that Lord Brahma has said earlier. So he's very qualified to answer these questions, but for some reason at that point in time he couldn't answer. So Lord Brahma, he started meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord. And then when he was meditating on Krishna, he appeared as a swan. And he answered the four Kumaras' questions. Basically, he said that with the sharp sword of knowledge, you can understand through logical reflection that the temporary and illusory nature of the material world, and you can understand that the soul is different than the mind and intelligence. So the Swan incarnation actually started describing Sankhya philosophy to the four Kumaras. And then ultimately, the Hansa Avatar said that, by devotional service to me, by worshiping me, by performing devotional service, this is actually how you can overcome sense gratification. So it's in the 11th canto. Then in the quadruped species, there's 3 million. Then Lord Varahadev appears. He'll be the next form of the Lord that the residents of Jamadvip offer prayers to. And then the human species, there's 400,000 human species. Of course, we know Krishna, Lord Ramachandra, and Lord Chaitanya. So he appears in each category of species. So then in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's even further ways to categorize and understand the different forms of the Lord. This is Sanatana Goswami. This is Lord Chaitanya instructing Sanatana Goswami in the different forms of the Lord. So it begins with Sri Krishna in his Swayam Rupa form. His original form is a cowherd boy in Vrindavan. That's the source of all other avatars. All other forms of the Lord is Krishna. Then it's described that Krishna has two different types of expansions. One is his Prabhava Prakash, and this is where he expands himself and he has the same bodily features and mood. So the examples here is of Krishna in the Rasa Lila, when he's expanding himself and dancing with each of the different gopis personally. So it's kind of like an expansion of the same, with him and the same features. And then other example is with Krishna in Dwarka, when he's simultaneously living in 16,000 palaces all at the same time. And then the other kind of first expansion from Krishna is the Vaibhav Prakash expansion. So this is Krishna, but with a different mood and different bodily features. And here he expands as Balaram. So then all of the other expansions of the Lord come from Balaram, or come from the Vaibhav Prakash expansion. So that first branches off. So then from Balaram, there's the Vilas expansions, and then there's the Svangsa expansions. So the Vilas expansions, they're the four-armed Vishnu forms that expand in Vaikuntha. So it starts with the first Chatur Vyuha with Sankarshan, Vasudeva, Aniruddha, and Pradyumna. And it's described that these four, the initial four Chatur Vyuha, there's nothing like them. We can't hardly comprehend what they're like. But then the Sankarshan from that Chatur Vyuha expands into another Chatur Vyuha, which is known as the Vaibhav Vilas. And this second set of Chatur Vyuha, it's described that there's 24 forms of Vishnu that appear from this second set of the Chatur Vyuha. And they're identified by how Lord Vishnu is holding the different weapons that he has, or the two instruments for giving blessings, the conch and the lotus flower, and then the chakra, and then the club. So those are the Vilas expansions. And then there's also the Svangsa expansions, which are partial manifestations of the Lord. So then there's 6 categories of Svangsa expansions of the Lord. So we already mentioned the Leela avatars. There's unlimited Leela avatars, but there's some that are mentioned in the Srimad Bhagvatam. There's 25 there. And these include forms of the Lord as Matsya, Kurma, Ramachandra, Nrsimha, Vamana, and Varaha. Then there's the Purusha avatars. So these are the forms of the Lord that deal with creation, the material world. So Karanadakashaya Vishnu, he's the one who kind of first creates or deals with the material energy, the pradhan that we talked about earlier. He's the one who, I think, glances at the pradhan. And then he enters into the material, the different, and also the universes expand from Karanadakashaya Vishnu. And then a form of Vishnu known as Garbhodakashaya Vishnu enters into each of those universes and lies on the Garbhodak ocean. And then another form, Kshirodakashaya Vishnu, actually enters into each atom of the universe. So these are the Purusha avatars. Then there's the Guna avatars. These are just the form of the Lord that's controlling the different modes of the material nature. Lord Brahma's kind of controlling the Rajas, the creation, Vishnu in charge of maintenance, and Shiva in charge of destruction. So then there's the Shakti Avesha avatars, which kind of branch off into two subcategories of categories. One is living entities who are directly empowered by the Lord. And then many examples are given, like the four Kumaras, Narada, Brahma, Anantashesh, Prithu, Parshuram. And then there's the Vibhuti expansions of Shakti Avesha avatars, which are a reflection of the Lord's might. So someone who exhibits a certain quality of the Lord, like it quotes Bhagavad Gita, where among demigods I am Indra, among Vasus I am Agni, among mountains I am Meru, among priests I am Brihaspati, among generals I am Kartikeya, and among sages I am Bhrigu. So this is another category of different forms of the Lord. Then there's the Manvantar avatars. So for each day of Brahma, there's 14 Manus, and for each Manu comes a specific form of the Lord corresponding with that period of time. And then finally, there's the last category of the Swangsha forms of expansions are the Yuga avatars. And there's different Yuga avatars which give the recommended process for self-realization for that particular age. So when Lord Chaitanya was describing about the Yuga avatars, this really sparked an interest in Sanatana Goswami. He was really curious to know. He was saying, "Oh wow, it's very interesting analysis of the Yuga avatars. I would really like to know how can we understand who is the Kali Yuga avatar?" So obviously it was Lord Chaitanya himself. So Lord Chaitanya is the Yuga avatar for Kali Yuga, but Sanatana Goswami was being very clever, and he asked Lord Chaitanya, "Who is the Kali Yuga avatar? How can we understand who the Yuga avatar for Kali Yuga is?" So Lord Chaitanya he said, "Oh, you can understand by referring to scripture, by looking at authorized shastra. You can understand who are the different Yuga avatars. So, and you can know by their personal characteristics, like the body. In the scriptures, it's described like the body of the different avatars and then their activities. So, by the personal characteristics and the marginal characteristics. So, the personal characteristics, like the Kali Yuga avatar appears in a yellowish form, and his characteristics are distributing love for God and chanting. So this is how Lord Chaitanya answered. He also said that you can kind of understand who is an avatar by their extraordinary prowess and their uncommon activities. You can kind of guess, oh wow, okay, that might be a form of the Lord. But ultimately you have to refer to scripture, and ultimately referring to their personal characteristics and their marginal characteristics. So Sanatana Goswami then said, I'm still a little confused. I was wondering if you can help shed some light on this doubt that I'm having. I don't know, who is this Kali Yuga avatar? I don't know. So then Lord Chaitanya replied, oh, Sanatana, just give up your intelligent tricks. Just hear about the Shakti Vaishavatars. And then he kind of dismissed the question and began to talk about the Shakti Vaishavatars. Indirectly indicating that he was indeed the Yuga avatar for Kali Yuga. So anyway, these are just some thoughts on the different forms of the Lord and Sankhya philosophy. So I think I'll stop here. Yes, Siddhartha Prabhu.
Waiting for this. So, couple of comments. So scientists understand law of conservation in terms of not law of conservation of energy. They call it these days law of conservation of energy and matter.
And matter.
Because matter is equivalent to energy.
Right.
But they don't have information about subtle matter.
Right.
Making science limited in application to those who are interested in spirituality, because spirituality is about subtle matter.
Mm-hmm.
And next one is Lord Ram is listed both in Leela avatars and also perhaps I believe also Yuga avatars.
I don't think he's a Yuga avatar.
Who is the
It
Yuga?
is true that there are certain forms of the Lord that are in multiple categories.
Who is the Yuga avatar for Treta Yuga then?
Treta Yuga, it's like this four-armed. So in Satya Yuga, there's like this four-armed brahmachari who we don't hear much information about, who appears in whitish color, who propagates the process of meditation. And then in Treta Yuga, there's another four-armed somebody, form of the Lord, who propagates who is also known as Yagya, and who propagates the deity worship and sacrifice. What's that? And his form is red. So it's not. I don't think it's Lord Ramachandra. It's someone we don't know, and we don't know so much information about the Satya.
What color is Lord Ramchandra? At some place I read he has a greenish hue. At some places I heard it's like bluish.
I don't know.
I don't remember exactly. My poor memory fails me. But where do you know any color that? And where do the Dashavatars come?
They're all Leela avatars, but they're like the 10 prominent Leela avatars mentioned in the Garuda Purana.
So Parshuram is mentioned in Shaktavesh avatar, but we consider him as.
But Parshuram, yeah.
So is he a living entity or is he?
I'm not sure about him. I don't know if he's a Leela avatar or not. He is a Shavik, so he's not also a Leela. Okay. Because I know there's some that are in multiple categories. So I'm not sure about him specifically. Yeah. So yeah, I'd probably have to refer to that. I haven't read that, so I don't know. Yes, Dayita Prabhu.
I just had a doubt about that, where you were saying Krishna is the connection between the false ego and the soul.
Oh,
I could
yeah.
not follow or understand that. Could you repeat that, or could you explain that, please?
Well, the idea was that Krishna is the source of both matter and spirit. He's a source of material energy and source of the spirit souls. So in order for The question was if how can conscious living entities interact with matter when they're completely spiritual? And that's only possible by Krishna because he's the source of both. And he can be like the communication link or the link between the two, the interface. Otherwise, it's not easy to describe how something completely spiritual could interact with something that's material, because they're just fundamentally different. There's no way for them to interact. So Krishna is the link. Yeah. Krishna is Paramatma. He expands as Paramatma in all the living in the heart of the living entities, and he picks up on the desires of the living entities, and therefore he's the one who actually is moving matter. The living entities can't move one little atom. They don't have the ability to move one little atom. The only thing they could do is just desire, want something to happen. And then Paramatma, picking up on that desire, he's the one who actually can move atoms and matter and stuff. So Paramatma moves, and he just picks up on the desire of the living entity and moves matter.
There's an example in Shikshamrita of fire and heat and light, saying that heat and light are not exactly the same thing. But they exist together because they have as their substratum fire. He gives some example like that I recall.
In describing matter and spirit?
In describing matter and spirit.
Okay.
So fire would be like Paramatma, who's the source of the jivas in the material world and matter. And so because he's a substratum for both, there can be a linkage between them like that.
Okay. Anything else? Oh.
Thank you for your class. Just a quick question. In the Swamsha expansions, when we come to the avatars, is that saying that Ananta Shesh is also like a jiva, but he's empowered with a certain potency?
I'm not sure about him. I don't. Ananta Shesh, like he's in the category of Shakti Avesh avatars. I don't know. I can't speculate on that one. This is what Lord Chaitanya said. Well, Lord Chaitanya said at the end of his discussion with Sanatana Goswami, he said, whoever hears, or Krishnadas Kaviraj said, that whoever hears this narration of the different expansions of the Lord is a very fortunate person. Whoever hears and recites this becomes very fortunate. So I don't know how you become fortunate, but that's the benediction you get by doing this, by hearing this. Yeah. Yeah, Raktak.
Like after they make the new, the new deities of Jagannath, what do they do with the old ones?
They bury the old ones inside the temple grounds.
Okay.
So I don't know. There's some kind of. Oh, you have.
Who was telling us about this, the time when they bury Lord Jagannath because no one should see that.
Right, it's a very secret process.
It's a very secret. So the whole city shuts down. They shut down all the power in the whole city,
okay.
and they wait until nighttime. And there's a process of transferring the soul of Jagannath from the old deity to the new deity.
Okay.
And one Brahmana is selected to do that, and he's blindfolded. No one's allowed to see what it actually is that's going on. And this has been the tradition for many years. And they said that immediately if you see it, you die. So one young Brahmana who was selected, it's like a whole process. I don't remember all the details Balaram was sharing. One young Brahmana, he was curious, And as the saying goes, curiosity killed the cat, literally. So he removed the veil, and then he died right on the spot. So there's a whole system of transferring the soul of Jagannath from the old body to the new body, and then they bury the deity. It's all in the dark; no one can see it. It's very interesting. Yeah. there's a portion of the body that's got like a door to it, and that's where the soul of Jagannath is.
Okay.
It's very secretive. I think Bhakti Purushottam Maharaj, he got like some inside connection or something, and some article was there. We can maybe get it from Balaram. He was sharing all this information with me. No one is really supposed to know about this.
Okay, last thing from China.
Thank you. I was wondering if maybe we could just have a little understanding, if you're aware, maybe Jai Jagannath, that on the aspect of the Yuga avatar, the unique aspect of this Lord Chaitanya. It's kind of a question amongst these different yugas, one out of so many, that this Lord Chaitanya comes to propagate the mood of Vrindavan. Can any of you comment on that?
I forgot the exact. Yeah, because there's how many yuga cycles in a day of Brahma? There's like 1,000 yuga cycles in a day of Brahma, and I think in every one day of Brahma, Lord Chaitanya, like Krishna himself, appears as Lord Chaitanya. This is what I remember. Does that sound right? So, and a yuga cycle is something like 4 million or 4,328,000,000 years or something. So you can do the math. And basically, Krishna himself doesn't appear as Lord Chaitanya. It's very rare. Oh.
It's the Yuga avatar in Kali Yuga, who is in Krishna himself. He distributes the Yuga Dharma, which is Harinam Sankirtan. But that Nam has what's called the Taraka potency. You often hear me say Taraka Brahma Nam, and when I'm doing the Prema Dhrani prayers. So the Taraka potency, this is mentioned in Mathura Mahatmya, the Taraka potency has the power to bestow liberation. So the Kali Yuga avatar distributes Harinam Sankirtan, which can free people from the cycle of birth and death. But when Krishna distributes Harinam Sankirtan, when he comes as Lord Chaitanya as the Yuga avatar, then the Nam that he distributes also has what's called the Paraka potency. And the Paraka potency has the ability to give prema. So there's a verse in the CC that says that Lord Chaitanya wove a wreath of Nam and prema and made a garland and then distributed it to the world. And that's because the Nam that he distributes has this Paraka potency in it, potentially, at least if you chant properly, to bestow prema bhakti. Which, as the normal Yuga avatar, just propagates Dharma and it can give liberation from the cycle of birth and death to Vaikuntha or something like that. So, in this way, we could say. We were just reading about this yesterday.
Oh.
Yeah, whatever.
I think that's what it is. I have to double check. But
How do you say, the Yuga cycle where Krishna appears, then the next Kali Yuga
Right,
Chaitanya
that's right.
comes right after.
That's right.
Being distraught that his mission of distributing prema through the process of Rag Marg didn't actuate during his pastime. So he's like frustrated. I didn't really, and then he's also frustrated that I didn't really fully taste all the rasas, fully and so like that. Introspecting, he comes back as Lord Chaitanya, the next in the Kali Yuga to finish what he couldn't do as Krishna, like that.
Okay. Thank you. Prabhupada ki.